G'day lads, in this video I'll show you how to build a model that uses live data to predict NHL games on Excel. If you're interested in downloading this model lads, then make sure you click the first link in the description below to go to the Excel Lads Patreon. Let's get into the video. So lads, the first step of the model is importing the league standings from the website Hockey Reference into Excel using a Power Query. So the data set should look like this: in column A, the NHL teams; in column C and D, the wins and losses; and then in H and I, the goals for and goals against stats. So the link to this data set is in the description below. I'm going to name the worksheet Raw Data and then make a new spreadsheet called ATTDEF Ratings. That stands for Attack and Defense Ratings. Then from cells A1 to C1, put the text Teams, Attack and Defense. I'm going to put a border under those three cells. And then from A2 downwards, I need to grab the 32 teams in the NHL competition. That's actually in my data set. So raw data B45 to B76, although you can type these teams out if you'd like. It really doesn't matter how you bring them into this worksheet. Now, before I find the attack rating for the Panthers in cell B2, I'm going to scroll down to cell A35 and put the text average goals. Now, beside average goals, I'm going to get the average goals scored by each team in a match competition-wide. And in B35, that formula is equals to the sum. And then in raw data, I'm going to select the range H4 to H41. That's the list of goals for H4 to H41. Close that bracket, and then I'm going to divide by the games played. So the number of goals divided by the number of games played, and that's the sum of raw data B4 to B41. So close that bracket, press enter, and then you should get a result of about 3.1. I'm going to reduce this to 2 decimal places. And now, since I have the average goals in the competition, I can scroll up to cell B2 again and find how good the Panthers are at scoring goals relative to the competition average team, and that's their attack rating. So the formula for that is equal to, open bracket, VLOOKUP, open bracket. The lookup value is A2. Make sure to put a $sign in front of the A to absolute reference the column, comma, the table array is A4 to O41. That's the entire league standings data set in the raw data spreadsheet. Absolute reference both the column and row in this array. The column index number is 8. That means we're returning the 8th column, the goals for, in this array, and put false as the last argument. Close the bracket, and then we're going to divide by another VLOOKUP function. This time the lookup value is still A2, and the table array is yet again A4 to O41 in the raw data worksheet. But this time the column index number will be 2 because we're returning the second column in the array, and the range lookup is false. So close that bracket twice and then divide by B35. Again, absolute reference to the column and row here, because when we drag down and across, we want that cell to stay fixed. So I press enter. The Panthers get a result of 1.06, meaning they're 6% better than the average team in the league at scoring goals. They score on average 6% more goals in every game than the average team. Now, after dragging that formula down to B33, drag the entire range across to C33. Then in C2, change the column index number from 8 to 9. This will return the defensive rating for that team, and then drag that formula down from C2 to C33. So now that we've got the attack and defense ratings for all of the 32 teams in the league. So go down to cell A37 now, put the text home advantage, and then beside it in B37, I'm going to put the value 5%, meaning home teams score on average 5% more than away teams. Now in A38, the text overtime 3-on-3 multiple, beside it the number 3, meaning that in periods of overtime, the rate of scoring is 3 times higher than the regular time. And in A39, the shootout percentage, beside it, the percentage of all shots in the shootout made. So now lads, what you're going to do is create a new worksheet and title it Result. In here, we're going to have our dashboard to select the two teams, find their expected goals, and get their probability of winning the game. So I'm going to merge and center the cells B2 to D3, and in here, put the text home team. Now beside it, in E2 all the way to K3, I'm going to merge and center these cells, and in here, I'm going to put a gray fill later on, I'll put a drop-down list to select the team from this cell. Now from L2 to M3, merge and center this cell. In here, I'm going to eventually get the expected goals for the home team, and I'm going to fill that in sort of a light orange color. Copy and paste this merge cell into N2 and P2, and then make borders around each cell like this. Then copy and paste B2 to Q3 into cell B5, change home team to away team, and then I'm just going to change the colors to something a bit darker so we can tell the difference between the two. Now I'm going to select cells E2 and E5, go into the data tab up here, and then the data validation icon in here. Once you press data validation, a pop-up window will appear. I'm going to allow a list, and the source for that list, what I'm choosing from in that list, is equal to, back in the attack defense ratings worksheet, the list of teams in A2 to A33. So once I press OK on that, in each of the cells there's going to be a drop-down list where I can select the teams in the match. So let's pretend the home team is the Boston Bruins, and then for the away team in cell E5, the Dallas Stars. And of course you can change these teams whenever you like using the drop-down list. Now in cells L2 and L5, I've got to find the expected goals for the home and away team. I'm going to do the formula for L2, the home team first. So for Boston, that's equal to VLOOKUP, open bracket, my lookup value is E2, the home team. In this case, it's Boston. The table array is A2 to C33 in the attack defense ratings worksheet. Make sure you put a $ in front of both the row and column to absolute reference this array. The column index number is 2 as I'm looking up the attack rating for the home team, and the range lookup is false. Close the bracket, then multiply by another VLOOKUP function. In this case, I'm looking up E5, the away team in the result worksheet, in the table array A2 to C33 with a column index number of 3 this time. I'm looking up the away team's defense rating. False, close that bracket, then I'm going to multiply by the average goals in B35 of the attack defense ratings worksheet. And then I'm also going to multiply by a square root function in which the number is 1 plus B37 in the attack defense ratings worksheet, which is that 5% figure. Close that bracket, and then I get a decimal, once reduced to 2 decimal places, is equal to 3.36, meaning Boston is expected to score 3.36 goals in this clash against the Stars. Now, I've got to get the expected goals formula for the Dallas Stars now, and I can do that very quickly by only changing 2 things in the formula. The first thing I'm going to change is the lookup value. I'm now looking up E2, and secondly, I'm going to change the home advantage function by inserting an open bracket before the square root function, followed by a 1 divided by sign, and then wrapping it all with a closing parentheses at the end. So I'm going to press enter on that, and then I'll get the expected goals for Dallas Stars now, which is 3.11. So Boston are slight favorites in this clash, and perhaps that's due to a home advantage of 5%. That advantage would shrink if the Stars played at home versus the Bruins away. So now I'm going to refill that color to a darker orange, and my next step is to run single game simulations in the attack defense ratings worksheet so I can find the probability of the home and away team winning based off of their expected goals. So go back into the attack defense ratings worksheet, and then you're going to merge and center the cells F2 to I2. Here I'm going to put the text normal time, and below it will just be 2 simulations of the goals scored by the Bruins and the Stars in normal time. So I'll put the text normal time here, and then maybe a border below it. And then under that in G4, I'm going to put the home team, which is equal result E2, and then beside it in H4, the away team equals result E5, so that whenever I switch the home and away team, these 2 cells will update as well. Now in G5, I'm going to run the simulation for the home team in regular time. And to do that, I'm going to use the binomial inverse function. I'm going to run 10,000 trials. The probability S is equal to the home team's expected goals divided by the number of trials. That's result L2 divided by 10,000. And then alpha is the RAND function, open bracket, close bracket. I'll close a bracket on that formula and I've got a result of 2. So in this single game simulation, Boston scored 2 goals in normal time, but every time I press backspace on another cell or refresh Excel, this simulation updates. So now in H5, I'm going to do the same thing for the away team. Binomial inverse, 10,000 trials. The probability S is the away expected goals in result L5 divided by 10,000. And then alpha is the RAND function again. So I'll close that bracket. And then I get a result of 3-3. So after normal time, the home team has scored the same amount of goals as the away team, meaning it's time to go to extra time. So copy and paste cells F2 to I2 into F7. And then I'm going to change the text to extra time before I press enter. And here what we need to do is simulate the rest of extra time, given that the results in G5 and H5 are equal to each other. So put the text second in F9, the home team in G9 and the away team in H9, just as we did in row 4 above. Now under second in F9, put 1, in F10, put 2, and then drag this down all the way to cell F309 so that you get a count from 1 all the way to 300. This represents 300 seconds or 5 minutes of extra time. We're going to run a binomial inverse simulation for every second of overtime using an if function, equals if G5 equals H5, absolute reference both the row and column here. Then I'm going to run another if function, open bracket. My test is going to be if the random decimal generated by the random function here is less than, 2 opening brackets, B38, absolute reference both the column and row here, and then I'm going to multiply that by result L2, the home team expected goals figure, absolute reference this, close the bracket, divide by 12, close the bracket again, divide by 300, comma, the value if true is going to be 1, meaning if they do score in this instance, they receive 1 goal. If they don't, comma, 0, close the bracket, comma, value if false, open and close speech marks there before you close the final bracket. So here I've got a value of 0, meaning that the Boston Bruins haven't scored in the opening second of extra time. I'm going to copy this formula and in cell H10, go equals the same thing, except I'm going to change one slight thing. The result L2 figure is now going to be result L5 because the Dallas Stars run off the away team's expected goals. So now when I press enter, it's blank for both cells. That's because it's not going to extra time. The normal time simulated score in cells G5 and H5 are not equal. Now in cell G11, I've got a new formula, and that is equal to if, open bracket, G5 is equal to H5. Then if that's true, it's going to be another if function where I'm going to use a count if function with a range of G10 to H10. Now in this range, absolute reference both the column and row of G10, but in H10 only put the $ in front of the H, comma, 1, close bracket, greater than 0, comma, speech mark, comma, an if function, open bracket, the RAND function, open and close the bracket, is less than 2 opening brackets, B38, absolute reference both the column and row there, multiplied by, again, result L2, the home team expected goals. So go back into the result worksheet to find that figure. Click that cell, and then once you do an absolute reference that, close the bracket, divide by 12, close the bracket, divide that by 300, and comma 1 for the event being true, comma 0 for it being false. 2 closing brackets, comma, speech mark, indicating nothing, final closing bracket. Now what you're going to do is drag this cell down all the way after you've copied and pasted it into H11, again changing that result L2 figure to result L5 because in column H it's the away team stats. So now select cells G11 to H11 and then double click down so that the formula gets filled all the way down to cell H309. Now what we need to do is consider the possibility of the result being tied after extra time. So here in normal time it's 4-4 between the Bruins and the Stars. And then if I scroll down through every single second of extra time, it's still 0 goals every second for each team. and that's still the case by second 300 or the last second in the 5th minute. So this game goes to a shootout. But before we do that, go to K2 by copy and pasting the cell F8 into K2, change the text to final score, and then in L5 to M5, get the home and away team again by referring to the result worksheet. Leave the cells below it. Again, we're going to the shootout, so merge and center the cells K7 to N7. You can just copy and paste the cell already there and put the text shootout. Again, get the home and away team in cells L10 to M10. And then in cells K10 to K11, put the numbers 1 and 2, drag that down so you get a list going from 1 through to 20. And now in cell L10, I'm going to put the formula equals if, open bracket, the sum of G5, comma, and G10 to G309. That's the home team's normal time score plus the extra time score for the home team. Close that bracket, and then I'm going to make that equal to the sum of H5, comma, H10 to H309. Again, absolute reference this. This is the sum of the away side's normal time score and their extra time score. Comma, if that's true, then return an if function that tests whether the RAND function is less than cell B39. That's the shootout percentage. We set at 34%, absolute reference this. If this test is true, return 1. If not, return 0, comma, and then return 2 speech marks indicating a blank cell if the whole formula is false. So now, lads, you can drag L10 down and across to cell M12, because in an NHL game, the first 3 shots have to be taken for both teams. But then from there, the shootout can continue. In this model, we're going to cap it to 20 shots. And in cell L13, we're going to make a new if function. If, open bracket, and open bracket is number L10. If there's a number in cell L10, close the bracket, then return the sum of L10 to L12. In this case, we're going to absolute reference both the column and row of L10, but just the column in L12. If that's equal to the sum of M10 to M12, we're going to do the same thing here. M10 absolute reference, but M12 only a $sign in front of the M. 2 closing brackets, then we're going to return another if function whereby the RAND function has to be less than cell B39 again. Absolute reference this. If that's true, return 1. If it's not, return 0. Close the bracket, comma, 2 speech marks if the value is false. Press enter, and then we can drag this down to cell M29 now to fill out for both the home and away team. Now in cell M13, just double check that the cells referenced in the formula are still in columns L and M, and then you can drag that down to cell M29. Now it's time to go up to cell L5, where we're going to collect the final score for the Boston Bruins or the home team. That's going to be equal to the sum of G5, the normal time score for them, G10 to G309, the potential extra time score for them, and L10 to L29, again, the potential shootout score for them. So in this case, they've scored 3 goals, and for the Dallas Stars in M5, it's going to be the sum of H5, H10 to H309, and then the sum of the shootout scores for Dallas Stars in M10 to M29. Close that bracket, press enter, and then now we've got the single game simulation final score for the home and away team. These 2 numbers should never be the same unless, of course, the shootout extends above 20 tries for each team, but that's pretty unlikely. Now, lads, I want you to create a new worksheet and call it simulations. In here, we're going to run the outcome of the single game simulation 2,500 times to get a better idea of the win percentage for each team in the matchup. So using the result worksheet, bring in the 2 teams in cells B2 and C2 in A3, put the text trials in, and then below it we need a list from 1, 2, all the way through to 2,500 to represent the simulations we're going to be doing. In cell B3, it's going to be equals L5, the home team simulated score, and in C3, go back in attack defense ratings, it's going to be equal to M5. So now we've got the simulated score for both the home and away team. We can do a couple of single trial simulations. Now select cells A3 to C 2,503, go up into the data tab, In here, there'll be an icon, what if analysis. Press on that and go into the data table. Skip the row input cell. For the column input cell, just put a random cell outside the data set, say M4. Press OK, and then you're going to wait for the simulations to load. They've loaded now, so I can scroll down and see all the results here. It might take a while to load. 2500 simulations is a lot for some versions of Excel. And now it's time to analyze these simulations. So go back into the result worksheet, and here for the home team, I'm going to bring in the number of times Boston won, divide by the number of trials, and that'll give the win percentage for them. I'm going to use the sum product formula to do this. So open the first array with two minus signs, open bracket, simulations B4 to B2503. I'm counting how many times this is greater than simulation C4 to C2503. And then after you've done that, close the bracket 2 times, divide by 2500, the number of trials. When I press enter, I'll get a decimal, and in this case it's 0.5464. I want to put that to a percentage now so it reads easier, and I'll reduce that to 2 decimal places. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the Dallas Stars, equals sum product, open bracket, 2 minus signs, open bracket. This time though, it's going to be how many times C4 to C2503, the Stars simulations, is greater than the Bruins simulations in B4 to B2503. Divide by the number of trials again to get a percentage. And after we simulate the next lot of 2500 simulations, the Stars have a 46.24% chance of winning. The sum of cells N2 and N5 should be 100%, or exactly 1, representing the 2500 trials. Now select both the cells, go into color scales within conditional formatting, and then select the option that highlights the expected winner in green and the expected loser in red. Now go to cell P2, where in here we're going to convert cell N2 to decimal odds, and here we get 1.82. In cell P5, do the same thing, 1 divided by N5. Press enter on that, and then select cells P2 and P5. We're going to change the formatting of these cells to currency. Keep these cells selected, go into conditional formatting, color scales. I'm going to select the opposite color scale so that the priced favorite appears in green. Now I'm able to change the home team, say I do the Washington Capitals, and the simulations are all done. So it changes the expected goals for this matchup, and then correspondingly the win percentage in columns N and O, and the odds in P and Q. So now I'm going to merge and center the cells A8 to Q8, and then put the text puck line here. Below, we're going to find the probability of the Capitals or Stars covering the line. In cell A9, put the text team, and then I'm just going to center the cells really quickly. In B9 line, C9 probability, and then D9 the text value. So go back to cell A10. In here, I'm going to put equals E2, the home team, and then below it equals E5, the away team. Now in cells B10, I'm going to put the line as, say, negative 1.5 for the Capitals and 1.5 for the Stars. These are easily able to be changed. In cells C10, I'm going to put the formula equals sum product, open bracket, 2 negative signs, open bracket. It's going to be simulations B4 to B2503, the home team simulated score, plus B10, which is their line. And we're counting how many times that's greater than C4 to C2503, the away team scores. 2 closing brackets, divide by 2500, press enter, and the probability the Capitals cover this line is 17.2%, or 0.172. Now I'm going to do a new formula for cell C11, that's sum product, open bracket, 2 minus signs, open bracket. This time it's C4 to C2503 in the simulations worksheet, plus B11, that's the line for the away team, and we're counting how many times that's greater than B4 to B2503 in the simulations worksheet. 2 closing brackets, divide by the number of trials, 2500, press enter, and then I get a probability of 0.8116 here. I'm going to convert these to percentages to 2 decimal places, and again the sum should be, or has to be rather, 100% or 1 from C10 to C11. Now if I change the lines around to make the Capitals an advantage of 1.5 in this match, then the probabilities will change. Now in cells D10 and D11 under value, I'm going to put the formula equals 1 divided by C10, and that'll return the decimal odds for both teams according to their probability in column C. So again, I'm going to select both those cells and change it to the currency formatting. And now I'm going to copy row 8 into row 13, but instead change the text from puck line to total goals. And here we're going to find the probability of under over goals. So in A14, put the text goals, A15 and 16 over and under. Here in cell B14, that's the parameter. Here we're going to test under over 5.5 goals. The over formula in cell B15 is going to be minus open bracket simulations B4 to B2503, the home team simulated scores, plus C4 to C2503. So we're just summing the total goals for every single game, and then we're seeing how many times that's greater than B14, which is that over under threshold. Two closing brackets, divide by 2500, and in this scenario 0.6152 or 61.52% of the trials resulted in goals over 5.5. And I can copy and paste that formula into cell B16, but change the greater than to a less than. So we get a total sum of 1 between cells B15 and 16. And again, I can adjust cell B14 to change that parameter. In column C, I'm going to get the value again by going 1 divided by the probability and then changing it to currency formatting. Now lads, I'm going to change B14 to 6.5, and the over market should drop while the under market probability should increase, which it has done. Now go down to cells F18 to I19, and you're going to merge and center these. Change the text to about 18, size 18 that is, and then make it equal to E2, the home team. Do the same thing in cells A23 to A26, merge and center, and then make it equal to E5, the away team. Now in B20, put equals 0, B21, 1, and then drag this down to cell B30. Do the same thing horizontally out to cell M19. Now lads, select the cells C20 to M30, and make all borders. In here, I'm going to make a matrix of the probabilities of every scoreline here from goals 0 through to 10. So in C20, put the formula equals sum product, open bracket, C19, $ in front of the row, equals simulations B4 to B2503. That's the home team scores. Close the bracket after absolute referencing both the column and row in this B4 to B2503 range. Close the bracket, and then multiply this array by another open bracket, B20, absolute reference just the column B, equals simulations C4 to C2503. That is the away team simulated scores. Absolute reference this range by putting a $ in front of both the column and row, two closing brackets, and then divide by 2500. Press enter, and then we get the probability of a nil or draw. That's 0, and it should be 0 for 1 all, 2 all, 3 all, because the game can't end in a draw. I'm going to drag this formula down to C30 and then drag it across to M30. Now the total sum of this should be 100% or 1 again. I can go up to conditional formatting after changing it to a percentage, perhaps to 2 decimal points. Conditional formatting, color scales, and then select the first option so that the most likely events are highlighted in green. Now, if I change the teams again, this matrix as well as the puck line and total goals markets should change. Perhaps New York Rangers versus another team. We can select, after scrolling down in the drop-down list, the Ottawa Senators, and then the expected goals will update, which will inform every single market on the spreadsheet. Thanks for watching, lads. Make sure you click the first link in the description below to download the model and learn more about sports modeling in Excel.